I'm Sam Harcrow with the Oklahoma Highway Safety Office, and we are pleased to have you all here today, and certainly this panel discussion about technology. And thank you for coming in. I want to introduce Leslie Gamble. She's a lifelong Oklahoman with great state pride. For the past year and a half, she has served as Public and Legislative Affairs Manager for AAA Oklahoma. The role has provided the opportunity to address the legislature on traffic safety issues and lead initiatives to reduce vehicle crashes. She has focused efforts on decreasing distracted and impaired driving and improving driving practices among teens and senior adults, the most vulnerable on Oklahoma roads. Prior to working at AAA, Leslie's career was spent in healthcare public relations, including leadership roles at OU Physicians and Oklahoma Blood Institute. That experience has provided a natural fit with AAA's mission to reduce motor vehicle-related crashes, the #1 cause of unintentional death for Oklahomans, ages 5 to 24. Welcome, Leslie.
Well, we are so glad to be hosting Technology Takes the Wheel here today. This has been something that has been a dream of AAA's to do here in Oklahoma for a couple of years now. We've seen it done in some other states, especially some that are much more closely related to the automobile manufacturers, where they're kind of in their backyard, and we've always wanted to do this here, and it's just been our great fortune to partner with the Highway Safety Office to do this session, to bring in Jill Ingracia from our AAA National Office. You heard her earlier. She's a part of this panel, and what we wanted to do in this session is really bring it down to somewhat of a local level. So Jill's going to continue to help us by giving us some broader perspectives and to answer our questions on a myriad of things. Anything you have a question on, we would love to just, shoot the breeze on this a little bit, because we all are really looking at what might happen in the future, and it's interesting to hypothesize a little bit and to think about things. But we also, as I said, want to bring it to a state level. And so today we are involving professors, researchers from both the University of Oklahoma and Oklahoma State University. And on the far left there is Dean Paul Tukalski. He is the Donald and Kathy Humphreys Chair of Engineering and the Dean of the College of Engineering at the Oklahoma State University. And then here, closest to me, is Dr. Michael Molina. He's the librarian at the Oklahoma Transportation Library at the University of Oklahoma. So both of them have good experience in what's going on here in terms of the academic environment, research projects, and we thought it'd be good to get them together and learn a little bit more about that as well. So we're going to be requesting questions from the audience. My counterpart, Mark, is around here, and will collect up your questions on your cards and bring them up to me, and we'll get those asked. But just to kind of start us off, I wanted to just ask each of you, we'll start with Dean Tukalski, just tell us what you see occurring within your institution and different partnerships you might be a part of here in Oklahoma that are related to this advancement of automobile technology. You can use the microphones there, please.
Thank you, Leslie. Now, I'm part of the Autonomous Vehicle Task Force that the state has with the State DOT, Turnpike Association, AAA, and many other organizations across the state, looking at this for the last 2 or 3 years about this is coming down the road, literally, and you have to think about where this goes. Oklahoma State has an Unmanned Systems Research Institute. It does a couple $1 million a year in all kinds of work across multiple realms. It does it does ground vehicles, air vehicles, vehicles that go through pipes, military vehicles around the world, and so forth. And so these kind of systems, as you heard from Jill earlier this morning, the issues, the technology is moving along. I told you a few minutes ago, I said 90% of everything we need to do is already done. It's the last 10% is going to take us 90% of the time. And this is honing it. As you get more miles in the can, you get more scenarios in the computer. Artificial intelligence continues to drive it. How much computational power you have for the car or the vehicle to make the decisions. And so that's a lot of the things we do from the cyber side all the way to actually designing, constructing, and implementing these vehicles. We have autonomous golf carts and all this kind of stuff that can drive around campus if you want. But the key technologies I think we talk about today are how do we get on the road, on the highway, or on our residential streets. And so our primary focus at Oklahoma State has been really the freight corridor. We believe that the trucking companies, the companies who are manufacturing trucks, PACCAR, Navistar, and so forth, they already are fully implementing their trucks so that they could be digitally controlled. They're not putting the capabilities of actually implementing that in, but you have to start building the trucks now and then putting that equipment and that kind of brain power inside the car or inside the truck so that it isn't obsolete in a few years when the technologies are here. But this tells you that the truck manufacturers are already gearing up for this. They believe that this is not far off. It's a question of controls, mapping, and this kind of thing. Platooning, the platooning technologies already work. Almost every single truck made in America already has the technology to do platooning in it. If some states permit it, some states don't. Oklahoma's moved positively in that step. How many trucks you can platoon, how do people get used to platooning, things like this. But the energy savings is tremendous. So that front vehicle saves about 7% of its fuel. Believe it or not, it's in front, and all the other trucks are behind it, and it's still saving fuel because of the eddies behind the truck don't exist. And the trucks behind it save about 10% of their fuel. So when you talk about fuel savings for trucking companies, but also pollution standards and all these other kinds of things, they're ahead. When we look at the Nikolai trucks, so that we have convergent technologies that are coming together on this. We think about only autonomous at this conference, but vehicles are drastically changing. If you look at, everyone's familiar with Tesla, but there's a whole group of trucks and other manufacturers who are working on different types of ways of powering a vehicle. How do you pay for your highways to do all this? And the complications. The Nikolai truck, which probably will be out in the next few years, the Class 8 or Class 6 trucks will be out with the Nikolai 1,200 miles without stopping. Well, you need an autonomous system to actually utilize the truck. And so they have venture capital to put hydrogen within 400 to 500 miles everywhere on the highway, so you could stop anywhere you want pretty much. Your truck will tell you where to stop if you need fuel cell hydrogen. It already exists. The hydrogen stops already exist in California and several other states, but they'll exist cross country on the major southern routes, which are used in the winter. Only the southern routes are guaranteed by fleet companies to deliver across country. So you'll be able to deliver from Atlanta to LA overnight. There's no train that can do that. And the amount of CO2 emitted to take it by FedEx plane is tremendous for that. So if you're trying to use low impact, a fuel cell, basically, its yield, its exhaust is water vapor. So there's a lot of potential ahead of us, I think.
Michael, I want to hear from you a little bit about what's going on at the University of Oklahoma and different research projects you're aware of there, different things going on where.
Okay, yeah, great. So at the University of Oklahoma, we're spending millions of dollars on intelligent transportation systems, and there's really three pillars that we're working on, three organizations that we're funding at the university. One is the Center for Intelligent Transportation Systems, which focuses on communication systems for vehicles and like the roadway signs that communicate to vehicles if there's inclement weather or if there's traffic jams. They're working on those systems as well. And one of the recent projects they just completed was attaching vehicle cameras to snow plows in rural areas. And that was going to help create a network of real-time information for rural locations on inclement weather and be able to send it to vehicles or traffic managers across the state. So, and that's one of the big issues with Oklahoma right now, is in the rural areas, you don't have that much of a network built up. So how do you bring that infrastructure there? Well, you can attach it to the mobile vehicles that are already there. And one of the other things that they worked on was a virtual traffic management system to help local officials kind of organize and help plan out traffic situations, again, if there is weather or inclement weather. So, like I'd mentioned, one of the main focuses of Oklahoma research is on the weather situation, because that's going to affect so much of the traffic flow in the state. So, and a lot of our research is focused on that. So the next area is an organization called the Southern Plains Transportation Center, which is a university transportation center which is co-affiliated with 7 other universities across the region, and they conduct research in climate and multimodal transportation, autonomous vehicles, and how it's all interconnected essentially to help solve problems for traffic management and anticipating weather patterns that will impact traffic management. They do a lot of outreach, like with local high schools. They bring in high school students to see engineering classes and workshops and get them excited about the transportation industry. And they also fund a lot of research programs across the region in these areas. So bringing in the high-level advanced research on these topics, as well as starting local to try to get people interested and impassioned for transportation research. The last area is the Advanced Radar Innovations Lab, which is located on the campus right next to the National Weather Center. So again, it is going to be weather focused. They have these big radar trucks that they send out, whenever there's a tornado, whenever there's a storm, they're going to anticipate where these weather patterns are moving and be able to communicate that in real time to vehicles and other locations and traffic control centers. And really, that's where our university is focusing on and where we see the future going, is creating these patterns and systems of anticipation. Because in the future, you're going to have cars that can communicate between the car. You'll have a network of a car communicating with another car and another car that creates this map and this marker that can help feed information to maybe a central location or to your own car or to an app that will anticipate road conditions, or maybe there's accident anticipation. There's an accident up at the front that a car is detected. It sends that information back to another car, which will alert the driver either through an auditory signal or to vibration in the seat or some other technology. But that kind of anticipation technology, and with weather and climate, is what the University of Oklahoma is focusing on right now. And working at the library as I do, I kind of get a ground level to see, well, what are people interested in? What are people researching or want to research about for this intelligent transportation? And one of the things recently that people have been interested about is, how exactly are we going to pay for all of this? Like, more and more autonomous vehicles are moving towards electric vehicles. They're not going to be using gasoline as much. So what happens to the gas tax? When that goes down, when maybe there isn't much income from a gas tax, how is that going to impact the state? Because you're looking at a loss of millions and millions of dollars. So trying to come up with ideas to help fund this autonomous vehicle, progression is going to be one of the big challenges that we'll be focusing on across the state and as a university. So,
thank you. That's great. So Jill, someone in our audience wants to know if we know the number of vehicles that have the ability to be self-driving that have been sold or on the road right now. Like, how would we quantify where we are right now?
Well, I think probably the right answer, I should say, is none, because right now there aren't any vehicles that you or I can buy that would be considered fully self-driving vehicles. Vehicles that have driver assistance features that can allow some capability for the car to be in control, but the driver still needs to be fully engaged in those scenarios. So a Tesla, for example, a Nissan with ProPilot Assist, or a GM with Super Cruise, those vehicles are out on the road, but they are not full self-driving vehicles. And the technologies that are incorporated into those vehicles right now aren't considered self-driving. Even the Tesla owner's manual will tell you that the driver is in control and needs to remain in control. The technology is not responsible for, overall responsible for the vehicle. So, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head in terms of the number of Teslas or GMs or the Nissans with ProPilot or any of the other vehicles that have potentially level 2 systems already incorporated. But I'm sure that information is available.
Yeah. So we know that, is it safe to say the fleet of vehicles on our road typically turns over every 10 years, right?
About 11 years.
Something like that.
Yep. So it's going to take time. So even if a fully self-driving vehicles were available tomorrow, it's going to take probably 10 years for the full fleet to turn over, even if everybody held on to the cars they have now for the standard average 11 years and then decided they were going to purchase or were able to afford a self-driving vehicle. There's going to be a mixed fleet of human-driven and artificial intelligence-driven vehicles for a long time.
Okay. Kind of for you, Jill, but the others, I'd like to hear your comments on this too. Someone wants to know who ultimately benefits from driverless vehicles. Because some people would think this is just kind of a corporate growth strategy maybe by automobile dealers. Who's going to benefit? Why would we even care about this or think this is worth pursuing?
I'll take the first shot at that one. I think on the previous one, I think there are a lot of vehicles with level 2. I have 2 of them in my own driveway. So my truck and my new Subaru, they will track the car in front of you. They will stop if the car in front of you stops. That technology is here. We're getting comfortable with it. People almost, when they rent a car, if it doesn't have this technology, they wonder, what kind of car did I rent? When you get to this part here, tell me again what's the second
The
question?
ultimate benefit of a driverless vehicle. Why do we want to see driverless vehicles come forth, or why would we care?
I think safety is maybe number one. We are still 34,000, 36,000 deaths on the highway a year. The autonomous vehicle boom could take us to 10,000. I really believe that. The fact is, distracted driving is different than texting and driving. The fact is, autonomous cars text between each other. They talk to each other, but they don't take their eyes off the road. It's because they're able to do multiple things at the same time that a human cannot. And you all know young people. They cannot, if their phone goes off, they feel compelled to pick it up. And now there are cars where the text will come up on the dash and you can see the dash, but you can't respond easily off of it and so forth. They feel compelled to do this. And more young people are not getting their driver's license. Quite honestly, they would sooner interact with their phone and their friends than drive, which, I mean, I had a 67 Firebird, man. There's no way I would ever text instead of driving that thing. Man, you drive that. So I would just say that is the safety is the number one thing. I think from a freight side, the economics drive it. There are 200,000 too few drivers right now in freight. The new freight vehicles that are coming down the road have the potential to do lower impact environmental. So diesel will slowly go away, I think, and you'll be able to take freight any place in the country, and address this with autonomous vehicles.
I would just build on that to say I think in terms of mobility opportunities, that's going to be another big benefit for people who have not been able to drive, blind, people with other physical disabilities, for senior drivers who maybe have decided they're no longer comfortable driving or have medical conditions that might limit their ability to drive safely. That's going to open up opportunities for those people to have mobility that they hadn't had before. So I think mobility is the other big beneficiary.
I think a third point, like how a lot of the companies are probably going to want to sell this, economics will be the number one, and mobility for sure. But for the going public, when you spend your time in a car, you're just kind of wasting hours driving from point A to point B. It's going to free up time for people to do things that they would rather do before they get to work. Maybe read a book, or do text or phone or call or catch up on things or plan the day. So I think time savings for people is going to be one of the big thrusts that companies are going to push for and say, hey, this is why you need to adopt it. Look at all the free time you get, which may or may not be true, but it's going to be a strategy that they'll use for sure.
My friend Tom Robbins, that's sitting up here, that's the facilitator of the Driving Oklahoma Task Force that we have that addresses this. He recently called our technology advances the secret seat belts. Okay, so in the way that we see seat belts as protecting us, this is another layer of protection if used correctly. But the technology that's available on our vehicles now, we can't rely on it, as we've heard, 100%, but it's an extra layer of warnings to us if we'll use that, and I like that thought. Gosh, lots of great questions, so I'm just going to keep running here with this. Are there any cities, Jill, you might know of this, or others, that are considering an autonomous vehicle facility similar to a toll, where a facility owner uses a fee to improve the facility just for the AV purpose? I don't know, toll roads. Or some kind of I guess I saw another one on here that's about like a corridor set aside in your area or in your city where these would operate. Are any cities considering that?
Not that come to mind immediately. So essentially implementing a toll on a facility that could be specifically dedicated to autonomous vehicles. I know there's been a lot of conversations about should we have dedicated truck lanes or potential AV automated trucking lanes, but nobody that I'm aware of that has gone forward and committed resources or a funding scenario to implement something like that.
So Michael, answer this for me. So teen drivers are the highest risk for crashes, but they're also the most willing to embrace technology. How would you see us helping teens adopt AV technology? Or in general, I know that's something that AAA strives for, is how can we get more people to take an interest in the technology that's in their vehicles already and adapt it? But specifically, what do you think is going on or going to occur with teen drivers in this future?
Yeah, well, with the millennial generation, and I guess Generation Z is what the generation after is now called. So, they're already taking such an interest, and they're going to be more predisposed than any generation since to really latch on to this and just let a vehicle drive them around for autonomous vehicles. So, what we really need to do is more education, outreach, and show hands-on. Where you see kids getting excited is when they get to interact with something or interact with the technology. So more workshops, more training, bringing kids out into the field, bringing them into a factory or a research area or somewhere where they can see the applications of the technology, and not just get them excited about it, but get them excited about the industry to think, oh, well, maybe I could work, as a job at this industry, because there are so many areas where you can apply this, from engineering to even research or librarianship. There's so many areas. So I think more outreach, more technology, more education, but they're already predisposed to it anyway. I think going forward within the next decade or so, you're going to see upwards of probably 50, 60% if it's not there already. So where the outreach really needs to be, though, is probably going to be Generation Y and back. Generation X and back, where you're going to see the most resistance from. So teens seem to be in a good spot, probably more education and outreach to the older folks.
Yeah, thanks. Anyone else have a thought about teen drivers specifically are adopting this?
I would say there's already the recognition that we have to revise and adjust the traditional driver training curriculum. So as new kids are coming of age and able to potentially consider getting their driver's license, rethinking what that driver training looks like. And if someone's not going to get a driver's license, but is going to be a passenger in a fully automated vehicle, is there any kind of education that's needed for them in terms of how a vehicle is a baseline knowledge of how a vehicle functions, or some of the safety systems in a vehicle? Is there any necessity for that kind of education? So we're already starting to evolve driver training curriculum to incorporate what we know about technologies now that those who are getting their licenses need to be aware of and have some exposure to. But what that looks like long term, that might be another venue or opportunity to introduce and educate on this subject.
Great. Dean Tukolsky, I think you know some about this, but there's questions about what private companies are involved in automated vehicles right now. Like, is Walmart doing things, Amazon, UPS? Where do we see future involvement?
Well, there's a lot of companies in this space, probably 60, 70 different companies in this space, just operating in the United States, many more worldwide. The technology implementation probably in China and Japan is greater than we have here. In the United States, the big companies, of course, are Waymo, is certainly the farthest ahead. That's owned by Alphabet, I think. And but you know, the manufacturers are already, so Ford, GM, so the big car companies are in this space in a very big way, mostly keeping it fully internally developed, trying not to let their technologies be known too far out. And then there are a lot of startup companies who are working on theirs. There's probably 40, 50 startup companies who are looking at the navigation systems alone that any company could use. There are ones that are doing intelligent transportation. Are we going to use LiDAR to primarily do it? Some are trying to do GPS. That's not as reliable, likely. And so the kind of technologies, there's a big competition right now, and this is what's driving it. You know, I think, Tom, when we started our thing, everyone says, well, this is 10, 15, 20 years off. Here we are 3 years later, and we're probably like, well, it's 7 years off. You know, so time is being compressed because of the speed and investment that's being made in these areas and the drivers of it. Like I said, most manufacturers are already in a position to start generating vehicles. It's a question of liability. There isn't a statutory structure yet to put these cars and trucks on the road yet. And that's something for government to figure out. You just can't throw them out there and then take your liability unknown. But I think they'll work that out. They'll try to start figuring out, who insures these cars and, what does it look like. If I'm not driving, am I responsible for an accident? And there's probably some pool system that will just say, well, we're going to treat it just like any other accident, and there'll be an adjustment for that.
That was actually one of the questions was about liability. Who's liable, and how can we, hypothesize about what it might look like criminally or, civil liability for if the technology fails? What are we seeing?
And I think that's still a bit of an open question and ongoing conversation. There have been some companies, I want to say it was maybe GM, who early on said if their self-driving vehicle was involved in a crash, they would accept liability. I might be wrong on who that was, but I think because in the near term there's going to be so many potential different scenarios. If we do have, for example, a Waymo self-driving vehicle on the streets of Chandler that is in a crash with a human-driven vehicle, uncovering the factors that contributed to that crash and what role the software and the vehicle might have played a role in that crash, There's going to need to be access to data for investigators and an ability to understand and interpret that data. I think that was a problem that the National Transportation Safety Board experienced with the Tesla crash in Florida, that they asked for the data from Tesla, but Tesla had to really help interpret that data, just the volumes of data that are out there and the ability to understand that. So I think it's going to be complex, and there's going to have to be a little bit of either experience out on the road or companies stepping forward saying, up to a certain extent, we're going to own responsibility for our technology and what it does.
I have a question about motorcyclists, and do y'all know about any organizations or how motorcyclists are being thought of in terms of software design of self-driving cars? Just how would that work in terms of others on the road?
Well, I think almost all of the companies who are doing the computerized systems for this have recognition systems for motorcyclists, and most of them can recognize cyclists as well. The issues probably, it's a harder thing, is a cyclist who is somehow, appears on the road or something like that. Motorcycle usually is traveling at the same speed as the vehicle. It can be easily recognized and so forth. It's pedestrians who just show up. It's like a deer jumping across the road. Mm-hmm. The same thing. We can't brake a car fast enough for. Those are the issues. I think most of these vehicles will recognize motorcycles just as they do a car. They'll probably be better because a car tries to just get around you or, figures you're just like a bicycle or something. The programs are all going to just treat you like a block. If you ever look at the programs, a motorcycle, it treats it like a computer block that's taking up the road, and they won't violate it.
So, Michael, what would you tell our transportation department to do to kind of get ready for what's coming in the future? Those that work on the roadway striping, just our infrastructure in our state. I know that you work a lot with ODOT, and just what would you see happening as the future of a transportation department and evolving?
Well, roadway striping is going to be so vitally important for software that tracks where the vehicles are going to be going, but then what do you do with that when there's a snowfall or when the road is actually covered and there's no way to detect what the striping is? Some people have suggested using GPS coordinates, doing a software like Google Maps where it shows where the roadway should be, and so using that to compensate whenever there's some kind of climate-related issue, but then what happens if there's other issues compounding that? It's a really complex thing that right now I don't know if the industry as a whole has a handle on. There are certain methods they're using to combat that, like enhanced roadway striping, like using GPS coordinates and things like that. But as far as a holistic approach that's going to future-proof everything, I think it's one of those things where it's so new that people have to prepare for that we may be doing some troubleshooting as we're, figuring everything out. So it may just be something where we'll have to wait and see. So there are technologies out there that they're working on, but it's still in development is all I can say.
Other two of you have any other things to add on that before I move on?
Well, I would say that there's the manufacturers who make the technologies and the highway designers, the public highway designers, there's a long discussion ahead of them. Because the vehicles can have sensors to do all kinds of things. They can tell where a shoulder is. They don't have to use a line. Right. Because lines can be covered, they can be dirty, they can be non-existent. So most of the technologies have a way of not using the lines. The level 2 that you all use or in your car, that's all line-based. If it don't have a line, it can't tell you. It's like you're getting out of your lane. But there are other technologies that keep in lane. So if the side road or the middle stripe or something like that, if they texture it the car can tell, the truck can tell the difference, anything like that. So, there'll be, I think technology and, like I said, standardization has to come to a point where, just like we decided years ago we're going to have a 12-foot lane, these are what the stripes are going to look like. You're going to have stripes on the side of the road before the shoulder. Shoulders will have this texture and these properties and so forth. All of those design parameters, if they get changed in cooperation with SAE, the Society of Automotive Engineers standards, you could end up with a more uniform set of technologies that allow autonomous vehicles. But my experience with codes is that that's much farther away than these vehicles are to be on the road.
Okay, so let's talk about law enforcement, traffic enforcement. What do you see in terms of autonomous vehicle impacting jobs of those that are in traffic enforcement? Anyone thought about that?
Well, I don't know that I think there's going to be an important need for education for law enforcement to understand technologies and systems that are on these vehicles and how they operate and their capacity to obey traffic laws. There was a cartoon I saw the other day of a police car that had pulled over another car, and the police officer standing out the car, and it says, "Did your car know why my car pulled you over?" So there could be that sort of future. I know that American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators has been working with like the International Association of Chiefs of Police, Governor's Highway Safety Association on some recommendations and some opportunities for law enforcement and tech companies to do some cross-education efforts. I think Waymo has done some of that as well, particularly starting in Arizona. I think that's going to be important. One development that we've started seeing in some of the state laws that are passed, and I've got an example on my phone, provisions for a requirement for a law enforcement interaction plan. So in Arizona, California, New Hampshire, and New York, some of the new AV bills more recent AV bills that they have passed have included that provision requiring a law enforcement interaction plan. So requiring the tech company or whoever's doing the testing or putting the vehicles into the market to have an interaction plan with law enforcement and communication strategy.
Great. So we got people concerned about hackers. We all think about what would happen if we're driving these driverless cars and someone has the ability to make the car do something it shouldn't do. How can you guys envision that being addressed? How will there be confidence built that that's not going to happen for people to allow themselves to get into a vehicle? I won't say behind the wheel because we may not have to have a wheel, right? But people getting in a vehicle, having confidence in it when they know that control of it is handled by something other than themselves.
Yeah, I think, this goes to the cyber technologies that are essential in all of these. It's, how is it people don't hack into an aircraft, which is largely automated? How do they not hack into ship navigation and so forth? So a lot of these kind of cyber technologies exist at the high end of the commercial level, and now we're taking it to an individual vehicle. It's also a perceived issue because you probably can do that already with most of your cars, because most of your cars have a computer controller in it that could be accessed, because your mechanic can access it in newer cars remotely. That little button in your car that you call for emergency, that thing can start your car, open your car doors. It can do a lot of stuff. It can control your car because it has a security code and you give it the right to do so. So I think that will be hiding this and keeping this secure and using the technologies to keep things secure is a legitimate concern. But I don't think it's bigger than the other things we have to attack.
Anyone else have thoughts on that? It's a big issue.
I would just add, I don't think this is, obviously, it's not unique to the automotive industry or vehicles. The whole Internet of Things, there's cybersecurity issues for every industry, and pretty much soon everything we do, everything we own. The automotive industry has come together and created what's called the Auto ISAC, an information sharing consortium that's modeled after ISACs that have been formed for the financial services industry and other sectors, where they commit to come together and share information on hacks or cybersecurity threats that they've uncovered and some of their best practices. So those conversations are going on within the industry, and it's also a top priority within the U.S. Department of Transportation as well.
Great. Okay, Michael, take this one. We'll run with this and dream a little bit. So people are thinking of, once there are fully autonomous vehicles, what is the model of people being able, will they have their own cars, or will there be some fleet? And then people are thinking, well, how could I afford that? Okay, so I know there's this whole paradigm shift that's out there by some that look way out into the future. You might share some of what you all think that might look like.
Sure, yeah. We're quickly approaching a future where, your kids or your grandkids may not even need to get a driver's license anymore, or their grandchildren. So leasing cars will be an option. Purchasing cars might still be an option. But honestly, if you look at the companies, it's going to be the best way to make the most amount of money. Are people going to make more money just by leasing a vehicle and owning all the liability for that? Are they going to make more money by selling a car directly? Honestly, I don't see people giving up cars, owning a car totally, like even if it is autonomous. Like you're always going to have the classics, you're always going to have new cars being made. So I still see car ownership as being the future, but whether that's controlled by some company or how it's, maybe a leasing program or something, honestly, it's up in the air. It's whatever the company decide to do to make the most amount of money from anybody as possible. So, yeah.
That we go for, huh?
I would add, we're involved in a relatively new organization here in the U.S. called the Mobility on Demand Alliance, and so there's a lot of farther ahead in Europe, in places like Finland and elsewhere, in thinking, they call it the Mobility as a Service Alliance. But either way, it's thinking about what might a future look like in the United States, where mobility on demand is widely available through a variety of different scenarios. So it could be personal vehicle ownership, it could be car sharing programs like Gig in Northern California or Zipcar or any of those, where you can take your phone and pick up a car on the street, use it for as long as you need it, and drop it somewhere else. It could be public transportation systems. It could be scooters, dockless bikes, electric scooters, electric bikes, a whole package of different transportation options that you could potentially pay for all of it just with your phone, with maybe one app, all kind of operated on a back-end payment system, and it would all be fairly seamless, and you as a user of a mobility on demand system would have access to all the information you would need in the perfect world of when the next bus is coming, or where the closest available car share might be, or where you can pick up a carpool, or any of those options. So there's a lot of organizations involved in kind of thinking through that and what does that look like, and I think that sort of mobility on demand experience might look different everywhere around the country. A city like Los Angeles or New York or Chicago, the mobility on demand services might look different than they do in Oklahoma City or Tulsa or Norman. So there's a lot of conversations going on in the U.S. as well about that.
Mr. Tukolsky, any thoughts about this?
Yeah, this is coming. I was in Taiwan late last year, and I went into a convenience store, and there's no person working there. You just take anything you want off the shelf, put it in a bag, and walk out the door. And your phone buzzes, and it's paid for. Well, I didn't have the app. Right? So I'm trying to figure out, how do I pay for this?
Busted.
And finally, I had to find, there's like a janitor who's working in the back room, and he just takes the cash from me. He figures, well, that's close enough, But everything is completely automated, and that's the same way in Taiwan. You grab a car on the street, you just go up to it, you just click it, get it. You just actually don't have to click it. You get in it, the car knows that you got into the car. And then it sends you a code, and that code starts the car, and you drive off with it. Even one of my colleagues there told me, if you leave it messy, so if you throw a bunch of wrappers or something in there, there's a cleaning bill for you, too. It shows up. It says, well, you left a soda can in the car, you just got billed an extra $1. And that's how they operate. So this digital world is much farther ahead. It's easier to do when you have an authoritarian government who can just say, everyone has one app, we don't really need cash. And you're already seeing that around the world. We're behind that because we have a certain amount of freedoms on how we want to do stuff. But you go to China, very few Chinese, Taiwanese, even in Singapore, Malaysia, don't carry money at all. Their phone is their money. As long as you have battery, you're okay.
Sorry, if I may, just one other point. Like you mentioned, like in Taiwan, in these densely populated urban areas, the urban versus rural divide is going to be exacerbated so much by a lot of the automated technology. Like looking to the future, in the ride sharing and all that, society, I feel like parts of it are going to be rough. So the rural versus urban, it's only going to get a little bit worse probably.
So I've heard a little contrary to that, just that the accessibility, and as we even talk about a future with drone mobility for us, that rural areas may have greater access and affordability to a quick ride that's, summonsed by your phone than they do now. And that would be that. I was going to ask you all about the rural-urban, and I'm so glad you brought it up. Talk a little bit. I think it's very interesting to understand our agricultural industry. Dr. Tukalski, I know you mentioned that before, but the automation and what is actually going on there and how it may help some of those that we think, they'll never catch on there. This won't happen in rural America. What happens in rural America that has some synergies with this?
I think it has changed drastically. I think Uber, Lyft, these kind of companies have changed mobility tremendously. My father was in his late 80s and he had to give up his driver's license. And, there was no taxi in the town. I grew up in a town of 3,000 people. He still lived there. There's no way to get to the coffee shop or to get groceries. And so we just arranged for a guy who lives down the street to take him to coffee. Every single morning, just take him to coffee because he goes to coffee too. But now, I was there not too long ago, about a year ago or something like that, and I used my Uber app, and there was an Uber car to pick me up in 3 minutes in the town of 3,000 people. So this mobility, and I asked my sister who lives out on a farm, I said, can you get that Uber out on the farm? She says, oh, absolutely. My daughter just, an Uber will show up in 5 minutes in the middle of nowhere. So this mobility is changing society. Now, whether Uber or Lyft ever make any money and whether they can stay in business, I think is a whole different cup of nuts. But I think that model is going to continue to grow where there's a more community-based way in which to find a way to make money and to give older people and younger people mobility.
Just to take one final pass at wrapping us up, I think this is just a really good kind of send-off question for us to think about. What are Oklahoma's unique assets that could make us attractive to organizations, whether they be trucking or other technology companies that would work on autonomous mobility issues? How could we help our state be positioned from a leadership standpoint?
Well, I think the primary thing, the biggest thing we have going for us is we're the crossroads of goods and services. I-35, 40, and 44 all come right through this state. It's the way across the country. And so, you have I-10, I-20, and I-40, which go across the country in the south. 70, 80, 90 all can be closed in the winter. And so the fact is all goods and services from big fleets are all scheduled in the winter to come across our state or Texas. So that's a huge advantage for us. Now, can we take advantage of, we have the least expensive gasoline and diesel of those things too, so truckers come through here to get fuel. Then they stop right before they leave the state to get fuel and continue to go on as well. So those are certain advantages. I think most of these highways also have rapid ways around metropolitan areas. So when you're talking about cross-country freight and so forth like this, I would say that the turnpike is a huge advantage for us as well. You go to the turnpikes in the northeast United States, and the turnpikes are packed, and they're more expensive, and here the turnpikes are well managed. They're rarely congested, and it's a very good way to move around the state as well. So I think our transportation system as a whole, much of it has been rebuilt. We don't have a lot of deficient bridges anymore. A lot of our pavements are starting to age again, but most of them have been replaced in the last 20 years. So our infrastructure is in a strong position.
I think one of the biggest things Oklahoma will benefit from is the creation of jobs, especially in the rural areas, because as you have a new fleet of vehicles, be they electric or powered by CNG or anything, you're going to need maintenance areas along the routes to be able to support that fleet. So be it warehouses for distribution or storage, or be it recharging stations or anything. I think there's a lot that Oklahoma can offer and a lot that Oklahoma can benefit by supporting this initiative, and especially for the rural locations as well, because that's where the locations and the facilities are going to be built. So I think it's a win-win for the state.
And I guess I would just add that I think you've got assets like sitting on either side of me, the universities, the academic centers that you have that are leading research and innovative projects on this topic. Everybody in the room here who are committed traffic safety advocates and focused on what the potential implications are for a future of autonomous or technology-enabled systems and what that means for safety. I think also it's important for Oklahoma to really be able to articulate and understand what are the unique challenges that you're facing as a state, and how can technology and automation help to solve those problems? Because if you're clear about what problems you need to solve, technology can figure out what is the right technology to come and say, help.
Well, I want to thank you all for attending today. Could we give our panel a round of applause for that?